How can schools meet the needs of today's young people and their communities? In one of Andy's books, The Fourth Way, that he has made together with Danny Shirley, he explained, well, if the book title is The Fourth Way, it must have been the first, the second, and maybe the third way. And the first way was in the 60s, 1960. Then it was a time of innovation, autonomy, and little consistency. The second way, in 1980s, it was a way full of swings, marked by standards and maybe curriculum. The third way maybe is more familiar to us. Performance targets. More access to training and resources, test-based, data-driven accountability structure, and learning was narrowed to what was measured, and of course standardized tests. The fourth way. Yes, the fourth, well, let's hear it from Andy himself. Center for School Development and the City of Gothenburg proudly present Andrew Hargreaves. Andy?
Yes.
Yes, welcome to the City of Gothenburg.
Thank you.
And you are now at the stadium, Ullevi.
Yeah.
And you see, this was the stadium that Bruce Springsteen almost broke in June 1985. Please, welcome.
Thank you. I thought this was just for the camera, actually. I didn't think it was supposed to make a noise as well. And when I was asked to come here, I said, well, you know, it's very difficult. I'm very busy. I was in Norway last week. I'm in South Africa next week. They said, look, there are 3 reasons why you should come here. And I said, well, what are those? And they said, well, the first one is, if you come on this day, we will arrange it specially that this will be the first day of spring. And we will organize that particularly for you, just to make sure that so thank you for that. You know, it's been wonderful to have really the first day of spring. And secondly, which you've already said, they said we will fill the whole football stadium. Just so come to the football stadium and it will be full just for you. So I thought, well, that's a possibility. And then what's the third reason? And they said, what we'll do is you will look like Bruce Springsteen, because we will put or perhaps Madonna. We will put a microphone on you, and you'll look like a rock star. So those were the 3 reasons why. Why I came. But really, the fourth reason, the fourth way, is to be with people who have had busy days in school. I imagine. I mean, if you've been in a school today, could you raise your hands? Yeah, almost all of you. So thanks for giving up your own time, really. And some of you are probably feeling quite tired right now because it's busy in schools. So when you come to something like this, it's really the fourth reason and the fourth way, and it's the best way. I am going to talk about 3 books, and not just because they're 3 books, but because really they raise 3 issues. One is this book that is in Swedish called The Fourth Way, with the student literature. So when Dennis Shirley and I were writing this book called The Fourth Way, and I used to write on yellow pads, yellow legal pads. I wrote all my books on yellow legal pads. And I was in a coffee house, and there were 2 people next to me. And this coffee house really has 3 purposes in Boston. One is a place where homeless people go. and also professors. And it's sometimes quite interesting to see if you can tell the difference between the two. And another reason why people go there is it's if people do internet dating, it's a safe place, it's a coffee house to have a first date face to face. So I was sat there writing this book, and there were two people who were clearly having their first date next to me, and it was going very, very badly. And in the middle of it, the man turned around to me, so you can tell how badly it was going. If you think it was badly for him, you should have been his date. And so he turned to me and he said, "What are you writing?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a book." And he said, "Well, that's interesting. What's it called?" And I said, "It's called The Fourth Way." And he said, "That is so interesting," which showed you just how bad the date was going. He said, "That's so," and I said, "Well, why?" He said, "Well, it really makes me wonder what the first three are." So, first of all, with the first, I'm going to do a little bit more than you did, just quickly go through these three ways of change, and I'm going to ask you where you believe Sweden is at the moment, because to know where we're headed, we need to know where we are, and we need to know where we've been, and we need to know what to keep, and we need to know what to leave behind from where we've been. So I'll talk a little bit about this. And there's a sequel to this book, which Dennis, Shirley and I have almost finished, which is based on our own studies of high-performing schools and systems in different parts of the world. So this is, I'm sorry to mention it, Finland, and Canada, two provinces, Alberta and Ontario, Singapore, where I was a few months ago, and some things in California and some things in the north of England. And we'll see that adds some twists to the first argument about which way we are in and which way we are going. And in the middle, there is a new book that's just out in English last week, and somebody's even got, it's only been out a week. I don't know how you got hold of this book. You must know the mafia or some criminal organisation who can arrange it for you. But in the middle I'll talk about this idea of professional capital, which I think is really the most important thing for you as teachers, because the one thing that everybody agrees about at the moment, almost now, is that the thing that makes, and this won't surprise you, the thing in schools that makes the biggest difference to student learning and student achievement, the thing in schools, is the quality of the teacher. The quality of the teacher, it's not the leadership, it's not the budget, it's not whether it's a free school or a public school, it's not whether you have inspection or you don't have inspection. The thing that makes the biggest difference is the quality of the teacher, and there's it sounds like not a brand new idea, but everybody imagines it's a brand new idea, that the most important thing is the quality of the teacher. But then there's huge disagreement about what that then means, and there are really two views about what the implications of that are, and these put us in teaching at a kind of crossroads of the future of the world, in terms of what we now do to get the quality of teachers and to keep them and to develop it in ways that with many kinds of students will promote student achievement and student learning. One of those views is based on what Michael Fulham and I, Michael Fulham will be here in Stockholm in June, and in Gothenburg, I think, Göteborg is coming here also. And one view is based on what we call business capital, and the other view is based on a new idea that we call professional capital. And I want to begin really with this, to start it, just to kind of set it up, to start off with. Then we'll go back into the different ways of change. I'll ask you where you believe you are, and then we'll think about where we move ahead from there. So only I'm going to start in the middle, and then move back, and then move ahead. The business capital view of education now is, according to some multinational moguls of technology and media, and one of these is Sir Rupert Murdoch, is quoted recently as saying that public education is a $50 billion market for products in testing, in materials, in technology, in schools run as profit-making enterprises, which may be free schools here, or academies in England, or charter schools in the United States. And under this view of business capital, education is the new place where money is moving. It's not moving into property, because worldwide, that's flattened out. It's not moving into finance and debt, because worldwide, that's more than flattened out. Where is money moving? It's moving into education. And when we wrote this book called The Fourth Way 3 years ago, we basically set out at the beginning what is happening in the world and what does that mean for public education. So we talked about the economic crisis, we talked about immigration, we talked about the shift of the generations, the retirement of the boomer generation and the rise of new generations. And then we asked, what does this mean for public education? The difference now is that one of the biggest changes in the world is public education, is education, is what it is run for. Is it run for the public good, for public interest, for public life? Or is it run for private interest, private choice, and private profit of businesses or of parents with their own children and families? This is the business capital view. And in the business capital view, the idea is you get a yield on your investment in the short term. So if you can lower your investment and still get high returns in the short term, then this will add to what the business interests will gain from public education. In this view, if you make teaching, well, let me show you a slide that will kind of pull it together. In this view, if you make teaching easy, it doesn't cost much to pay teachers. If you replace teachers with technology, you don't have to employ so many teachers, so it doesn't cost as much for the system. Some estimates say that with new technology in education, you can reduce the costs of public education by about 30%. If, as some American states are now doing, you have regulations saying every high school student must do at least one course online, you reduce the number of teachers that high schools require. It's not an option to do one course online. It is a requirement to do one course online. If you standardize the curriculum, if you create less choice for teachers, if you do not require any more teachers to invent, design, create their curriculum, if the instruction is the same in all classes, it doesn't take as long to prepare teachers, to train teachers. to develop teachers, to redevelop teachers over time. The people who do it don't need to be quite so smart. They don't need to come from the top end of the university range. They can come from the middle or the bottom of the university range. Because teaching isn't so complicated anymore. Teaching is seen as something that's emotionally demanding. It's hard being with children all day, but technically simple, like the kind of teaching that some of us might have remembered from when we were children, teaching with whole classes rather than teaching with small groups. Teaching is seen as easy rather than teaching being hard. Teaching is seen as being driven by hard performance data. So when you have children who are struggling in your class, it's not about knowing cognitive science. It's not about knowing how children learn. It's not about knowing the different learning styles that they have, the multiple intelligences that they might manifest. It doesn't require any of these things. It requires performance data that shows where every child is every week in every class, that, by the way, somebody else can see as well as you, on a chart in the principal's office, on a chart in your school, on a website in the school district. Every child, every teacher, every class, every week, available to somebody, so that whenever a child falls behind, it's not your knowledge of the child or of learning or of parents or of the community that matters. It's whether the child is marked as a green because they're progressing, or an amber because they may be falling behind, or a red who requires just-in-time intervention. And in the discussions that we see that use this kind of method and are driven by this kind of method, teachers spend all their time focusing on the reds and the ambers. Because it's like industry. It's like removing defects, removing waste, intervening to eliminate all problems, rather than also raising, stretching, celebrating what you've accomplished with the greens. So teachers spend all their time in depressing discussions about things that are going badly and how to intervene with them, rather than also in discussions about things that are going well and the successes. This is like in medicine, only discussing the patients who are dead, or the patients who haven't healed, rather than also learning from those who have. So in the business view, performance data matters more than the experiential knowledge of the teacher. The evidence of research on the techniques that work with most teachers in most classes, with most children, most of the time, are superior to teachers' judgment. I'm not saying own it, you'll see. I'm not saying data don't matter. Teachers' judgment is more important than anything else. But in the business view, these are the things that predominate. And they are: make teaching easier, replace teaching with technology, substitutes the complexity of teacher knowledge for the hard numbers, with the hard numbers of performance data. This is the business view. And it is one, and then when you can track, monitor and test every teacher as well as every child, then you can pay the teacher differently according to their individual performance. So you can have a system where you don't pay all teachers well, you just pay a few well, whose performances exceed those of their colleagues with similar kinds of children in the same classes. Are you with me so far? Does this sound wildly off the charts for you? Okay, this is the business view. It's there, and it's real, and it's rampant, and it's accelerating like crazy. What's the opposite view? The opposite view is what we call professional capital. In the view of professional capital, teaching isn't easy, it's hard. It's not just emotionally hard managing a group of children all day, but you need to know when you see the first signs of Asperger's syndrome and be able to recognize that so you can bring in somebody and help you diagnose what the student's learning difficulties are. And to do that you need knowledge, and you need experience, and you need judgment, and you need professional development. It isn't just, you need to know a lot about literacy and the different ways to teach literacy, and to engage boys in literacy as well as girls in literacy, and to understand why there's a difference, and to keep upgrading your knowledge. Teaching's not easy. Teaching's like other professions. It's hard. It's challenging. There's a best-selling book on the New York Times list in America about 2 years ago. It was a book called Teach Like a Champion. And Teach Like a Champion had a wonderful title, and basically it was written by somebody who set up a chain of free schools, or the American equivalent of free schools. And it had 41 strategies, it's either 39 or 41 strategies, that any teacher could use in any class, with a whole class, without really any educational preparation, but just walking in with 6 weeks training over the summer, and then have this book, and you can teach like a champion. Where are the books called Heal Like a Champion? Litigate Like a Champion? If you go and see your doctor, and your doctor says, I'm very enthusiastic, I'm young, I'm passionate about teaching, I'm excited about wanting to do this, and I've had a training course of 6 weeks over the summer, so don't feel too nervous about me ripping open your body and looking at all your insides and then stitching them back together, because I'm passionate, young, excited, enthusiastic, and I've had 6 weeks training over the summer, and really it's not very hard what I'm doing. Now, in professional capital, teaching is difficult. It requires a lot of time, a lot of education, long periods of training, continuous improvement, the hours and hours and hours of practice and experience. So, just like a judge, you know how to judge. Judges know how to judge, not because the data don't tell them everything. That's why you need judges. And teachers need to know how to judge, because the data don't tell you everything. And a doctor needs to know how to judge, because the brain scan doesn't tell you everything. You need to be able to interpret it. It isn't self-evident when you look at it. And teaching is not individual. It's a collective responsibility. We'll see why in a second. And teachers need to, online instruction is important, but it's what you do with online instruction, the judgment, the pedagogy, the quality you bring to it that matters. So, this then means, what does this mean? Here we go. So, this is quite abstract, but it's going to get very concrete. Professional capital involves 3 things. The first is what's called human capital. Human capital has been in existence, the idea, since Adam Smith, but was popular in the 1960s, the idea that when we educate children, it's not a cost, it's an investment. Because if we educate them well, they will contribute not only socially but economically in the future. The same applies to teaching. So the view of human capital in teaching is that if you train teachers well, if you train them for 5 years, give them master's degrees like you do in Finland, the highest performing country. If teachers are tested for their emotional intelligence, if they're interviewed rigorously, if they show they've had experience and success with young people beforehand, if there's a lot of professional development, your teachers will have high human capital, and high individual human capital that they've acquired will show its returns in the quality of teaching and the quality of learning that they get. And some people who subscribe to this view therefore believe that you should reward the teachers who have high human capital because they're better qualified, they're more capable, or they work harder than teachers who don't. And you should pay the other teachers less, or perhaps remove them altogether. So it's a matter of the individual and what the individual has. And I know that pay for performance is very controversial in Sweden right now, yes? So this is the human capital view. But the second view is social capital, which you should know a lot about in Sweden as in all the Nordic countries. It's really about what the group achieves, not just what the individual achieves. So we know with children from poor communities that the ones who will struggle and find their way out will have adults in those communities who support them, who make them resilient, able to bounce back from adversity. It might be a parent, it might be an uncle or an aunt, it might be their teacher, but there's something in the group that helps lift the individual over time. And this is true for teachers. So when teachers collaborate together, when you look at children's work together, when you have the learning circles that you've had in Sweden for decades now, when teachers collaborate, you have around student learning and student achievement, you get high social capital, which also leads to quality, which also leads to higher student achievement. And there's a big study in New York City by a business professor called Carrie Liana, which is quite interesting, that shows that both these things are important, but high social capital can raise individual human capital. In other words, if individually you're not very good, if your community in your school is strong, if you work well together, you can raise the quality of a not very good teacher to at least not a bad teacher. And you can raise the quality of quite a good teacher to a very good teacher, because they're learning from the other people. They feel confident, they feel they can talk about their difficulties, that you can solve your problems together. So social capital can raise human capital. Individual human capital cannot raise social capital. So if your school's not doing very well, the answer is not to say, where can I find 2-star teachers? And they'll really lift the whole school. Because it doesn't work in sport, since we're in a football stadium. And I know because my colleague Alma Harris and I have studied high performance in business and sport, as well as education. Just getting 2 great stars, if the team's not working well together, will not lift the performance of the team. So concentrating on the individuals doesn't lift the quality of everyone. This has huge implications for performance-based pay. If you go to the hairdressers, and I have less and less need for this over time, but if you go to the hairdressers and one week you go in and they make you look like a queen, and the next month you go and they make you look like a scary clown, you don't think, well, what we'll do is we'll reward the person who made me look like a queen more, and the one who made me look like a scary clown, we'll give them less. What you think is, there's something not right about these hairdressers. If I can go into the same salon and get completely different treatments. If you go on the airline, oh, my wife's Skyping me. There you go. It's because I mentioned hairdressers. I better turn. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, I'm just going to turn my Skype. But just don't mind me. I'll just talk. You'll get to see what she looks like. No, I'm just going to turn this account off now. Yes, I'm online. Sorry about that. There you go. So, I'm sorry I mentioned technology. Obviously, it's coming back to attack me. If you fly on an aeroplane and one flight attendant treats you like royalty, and the next one treats you like dirt, you don't say, let's reward this one a lot and let's reward the other one not so much. You say, there's something not right about this airline if you can get this totally different treatment from people on the same plane. So when you think about social capital compared to human capital, it really, under human capital, people, through performance numbers, are concentrating, drawing everybody's attention to the extremes, which is, how do you celebrate a few brilliant stars here? And in the New York Times 2 weeks ago, there were teachers who had very high performance numbers, who'd got high performance pay, and they refused to take it because they said, we have no idea why we are performing better than the other people around us. It may just be that we this year did not have that one really demanding child who totally destroys the rest of the class for a whole year. That one child, but you know what? You took that child when nobody else would take them. And at the other end, we concentrate on people at the bottom who we need to, and Americans love this, who we need to get rid of. Because we have this idea that if you get rid of all the bad people, you'll only be left with good people. But if you have a bad organisation, you'll always have bad people. There's one school I know that had a chair where in the staff room, where the teacher, it was a man in his 50s who was most resistant to change. Every change that came in, he had an idea why it had never worked before, why it was a bad idea, why he wouldn't be doing it, it wasn't worth his investment. And then he retired. And then a replacement came into the school, was transferred from another school, sat in the same chair and had exactly the same behaviour. So sometimes we have a myth, you know, when you're a teacher, you think, oh, if only I didn't have these 3 children, I'd have the perfect class. But you know what? Probably 3 other children would just pop up to take their place, because that's the way, right? That's the way groups are, in a way. So, in the individual view, we tend to concentrate on the extremes. And that's where governments are kind of pushing everybody's attention. But really, what social capital tells you is the most important thing is how you move the majority of people forward over time. And you know, because people like Pasi Sahlberg, in his great book, Finnish Lessons, will tell you this is what Finland does. It moves the whole profession forward all the time by how it involves teachers in curriculum development, how they take collective responsibility, the kind of work conditions that they have, pay that's good enough, extra pay you can get for taking on extra duties, inquiry that is part of the job, not something that you do afterwards. All these things move all the profession forward. And so you probably know that in Finland, this is the last time I'll mention Finland. but if you're looking for a romantic partner and you are looking for a husband, the number 2, actually, let's do it, the number 2 preferred occupation women looking for a husband want them to be is to be a teacher in Finland. The number 2. Number 1, I'm sorry, is still doctors. And if a husband is looking for a wife, even though Finland rates one of the highest on gender equity in the world, the number 1 occupation of men looking for a wife is to be a teacher. Not because of the long holidays, not because they'll be caring with children, but because probably you will be the smartest person in the room and you will have the highest status, because the future of your society, all the public recognizes, depends on you. And that is social capital. And the message begins at the top, with the Prime Minister, with the Minister, about how important teachers and public schools are for the future of the society. It begins at the top. That's social capital. And the third, and at the end of this you're going to get a little question. The third is decisional capital. And decisional capital is a new idea that we take from the field of law. And in law there is something called decisional law. And decisional law basically is case law. So how do lawyers get better at what they do? They look at lots and lots of cases over time. They look at them by themselves. They look at them with their colleagues. They look at them in practice. By the way, they're not managing their cases all the time. They're not in court all the time. They know their cases better because they get time out of court. In Finland, Finnish teachers, I said I wouldn't mention it, but Finnish teachers know their children better because they're not with them all the time. That's the paradox. To know people well, you have to have some time away from them to be able to reflect on how well you know them. So teachers in Finland spend less time in the classroom than teachers in any other developed country, but in many ways know their children better because they have time to think. If I'm with my wife all the time, I can never go and buy her a birthday card. I can never think about what she needs for a book because I'm stuck with her all the time and she's stuck with me. And so I can be a better husband for my wife if I'm not there all the time, and in case she Skypes me, that's my excuse why I'm here and she's there right now. You need time away in order to know people. So decisional capital comes through experience, comes through practice, not just any practice, but reflection on that practice. Professional development that helps you get better at that practice over time. And then, after a certain period of time, you find that as a teacher, suddenly, when you've done all that, when you've got all these, you've had all these cases before your eyes, suddenly you're at the top of your game. You're probably as good a teacher as you're ever going to be. You've really hit your stride. You're absolutely on top of the job. You're a god, a maestro. The question is, and I'm going to ask you to talk to your partner for 1 minute. Just 1 minute, that's all. How many years does that take? On average, how many years does it take to reach that point as a teacher? Could you talk to your partner for 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll ask you. I'm just going to ask you to raise your hands now. Just raise your hands if this was the number you came up with. But please, everybody raise their hand at some point. 1 year. 2 years. 3. 3, okay. 4, 5. There are 5 of you. 6. It's an unpopular number, it says. There's not 6 of anything. 7. 8. 2, 9. But by the way, the answer isn't the age you are or the number of years. Doesn't correspond. Okay. 10. Ah, a lot of you. Okay. Between 11 and 15. Okay. Between 16 and 20. They can't get their hands quite as high as the arthritis. More than 20. Okay, so all I can give you is the data. There are 3 studies, one of which I've done in Canada on the emotions of teaching and educational change, breaking it down by different career stages of how teachers responded to change emotionally. There's a study by a woman called Corey Drake in California on teachers of different ages and generations and how they responded to mathematics changes with sort of difficult reforms, challenging reforms in mathematics. And there's a book by Chris Day in the United Kingdom on 300 teachers in 100 schools. and what affected their commitment, how passionate they were about the job, and what affected their capability, how effective they were at the job at different career stages. And when you pull these three studies together, the answer is pretty much the same in three different countries. And the answer looks like this. This book's very new, so this diagram's not very good. It will get better over time. But the answer is like this. So, two things that matter is capability, how good are you at doing what you do? And the other is commitment, is how motivated are you, how passionate are you? And in early career, in the first few years, particularly about the first 3 or 4 years, teachers tend, on average, to have high commitment. They're very, very enthusiastic. The highest commitment of all the groups, but relatively low, doesn't mean they're incompetent, but relatively low capability. When I ask teachers in other countries that have a lot of charter schools or academies that employ a lot of young teachers, many principals believe that the best teachers are in this category, in the bottom left-hand corner. They believe the young teachers are the best teachers. And what I say to them is you're confusing two things. You're confusing high commitment with high capability. You like people who are enthusiastic, because it's much better to have people enthusiastic than not enthusiastic. You like people who don't resist what you're doing, question it, argue about it, discuss it, and you mistake that for how competent they are. Because you'd rather have somebody who's very committed and slightly competent than somebody who's very competent but argumentative and difficult, which is sometimes how older teachers become with our own points of view and autonomy. At the other end, in late career, this is after about 20 to 23 years, what happens at the other end is that teachers on average their commitment is tailing off, so their commitment's declining by this particular point. Now, none of this research is from Nordic countries, but on average their commitment's declining. And there are many reasons for this. Their body's just not what it used to be. Sometimes, if you're teaching 6-year-olds, you just can't bear one more day when they're kind of pulling at your legs like this. You've had it so many years, you wake up one morning and you just can't bear it anymore. Because your brain can't handle all those things, all those kind of practical demands in the same way. So sometimes you have other things in your life. You have teenage children, or you have aging parents who make demands on what you're able to do. Sometimes you get a bit cynical of what's been happening in educational change, and you feel teaching's not what it used to be, that you've sort of lost something about the heart of teaching. So there are many reasons, but on average, commitment is tending to decline, and competence is all over the map. This again is in Anglo-Saxon countries, by and large, but there's more variation here than anywhere else. And that's because people have had more time to find their variation. And sometimes it's because they were trained in the 60s and 70s, when teaching was much more autonomous. So some people kind of figured it out, and some people didn't in the same way. So commitment's going down, and performance is all over the place. The golden cell is the top left. In the top left, commitment is still strong. Not quite as strong in the first 3 or 4 years, and that's not completely a bad thing. It means you're just a little bit more pragmatic. But commitment's almost as strong as in the first 3 or 4 years. And capability, your competence, just because you've been practicing this and playing with it so much, is right at the peak. And this period is on average between about 8 to 20 years into the job. So here's the next question, which is, how many hours of teaching does 8 years add up to?
10,000.
Ah. Have you read the book?
Well, actually, we talked about it last week, yes.
You talk about?
Last week, yeah.
Oh, you talked about it last week, okay. All right, I'm not asking you any more questions, if that's okay. But the answer is, it depends a bit on the system you're in, but the answer is about 10,000 hours. Why is 10,000 hours an important number? Why is it an important number? Because if you read the book by the Jamaican-Canadian Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, he summarizes all the research on different professions and occupations that have a lot of complexity to them, like being a superb musician. If you want to be a concert pianist, it's going to take you about 10,000 hours of practice. If you want to play in the pub on a Friday night with your friends, it'll take you about 4,000 hours of practice. There's about 6,000 hours that separates the amateurs who are enthusiastic and quite capable, a little bit capable, good enough to entertain their friends, from 10,000 hours when you're absolutely on top of your game. And if somebody wants to be blown away by you, or has a huge problem they want you to, you're the one they'll come to, not the teaching equivalent of the person playing in the pub on a Friday night. It's true of music, it's true of cookery, it's true of carpentry, it's true of medicine, it's true of teaching. It takes about 10,000 hours. And the reason I say this to you is that in America they have an organization called Teach for America, which believes, and in England they call it Teach First, and they have Teach for Australia, Teach for New Zealand, Teach for China, which brings in bright graduates who are qualified in their subject, train them for 6 weeks over the summer. They will come into teaching for 3 years without a pensionable salary, and then they will leave, and about 2/3 of them move on to something else. In England it's called Teach First. The joke is it means teach first, do something better later on. So part of this movement worldwide is one of the ways you reduce the costs of teaching and the complexity of it. Is you take young enthusiastic people, you work them very hard, they put it on their CV, curriculum vitae or resume, and then they move on to something else later. Do you have Teach for Sweden? Yeah. It will come. It will come. I came here in 1995 to give a speech at this university about teaching in the postmodern age. And one of your great professors, Ferenc Martin, listened all the way through the speech. And it said there's going to be more immigration. There's going to be more diversity. We're going to have to rethink the nature of our societies. There's going to be less centralization. And Ferenc Martin listened politely. Actually, we're two bizarre speakers. I'm one of the fastest speakers in the world. He's one of the slowest speakers in the world. We're like cocaine and marijuana, basically. I believe. I don't know where that came from, but please don't show that on the video. And he said, this was a very interesting speech. I'm sorry, but it doesn't apply to Sweden. We always think our countries are an exception, that what's going on in the rest of the world will not affect us, that somehow we can always stay the way we are. The Finns believe they can stay the way they are. Their dream is to stay just the way they are. I ask them when I go. And the one dream they can't have is to stay the way they are. So one of the things that will come here is some kind of movement called Teach for Sweden. When you can't recruit teachers any other way because you're not offering enough pay, because there's less freedom, because there's too much accountability, too much testing, then there becomes a crisis of recruitment to teaching, and then the public becomes open to other creative market solutions. Teach for Sweden will come, I guarantee, within the next 3 years, and anybody who wants to place a bet with me is welcome to do that. And why that is a bad idea is because it then means our classrooms will be full of teachers who haven't got their 10,000 hours. About 10 years ago in America, the modal number of years of experience in teaching, so the modal number is the number that occurs most often, was 8 years. There were more teachers with 8 years of experience than teachers with any other years of experience. Do you know what the modal number now is in America?
4.
It's not the average, it's the number that occurs most often. 1. There are more teachers with 1 year's experience than there are teachers of any other year of experience. The modal number is 1. And think about the implications. Sven gave the talk about the fourth way in about 3 minutes, but better than I have ever done. So just to remember, the first way of the 1960s and 70s, any of you who are over 55 will probably remember this, was where the government gave you the money and let you get on with the job. Parents trusted you with their children and left you alone. You could innovate and make up the curriculum, and if you were lucky and in a good school, it went very well, and if you were unlucky and in not so good a school, it didn't go so well, and there was no way to spread it around. When the oil crisis came in 1976, the first oil crisis in many countries in the West, teachers began to get older and more expensive, and there were less resources for the state, and innovation didn't seem to be spreading. Then people like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, basically brought in the second way of market competition and standardization and testing. It began in England in the 1980s, in Canada a little later, in parts of Canada, New Zealand, Australia, etc., etc. And then Tony Blair came in, and afterwards, after a few beers, I do Tony Blair impersonations sometimes. In May I'll be giving a speech straight after Gordon Brown. So I was thinking of really frightening him by doing my Tony Blair impersonation. And the third way, which was really pushed by Blair and Clinton and Gerhard Schroeder in Germany, was meant to be something between the first and the second, public and private. We'll still have a lot of centralized decisions at the top about a standardized curriculum, targets, performance, but we'll have more support and training from the bottom so that you're able to deliver the targets and performances that people are expecting of you. So this was really in some ways what the idea of the third way is, and I'm going to dig into this a little bit more deeply, but I want you to hold that on one side, and I'm going to give you another model to think about it as we push into what might be a fourth. And it begins with a question. And the question is, if your school were a horse, what kind of horse would it be? It's a very simple question. If your school were a horse, what kind of horse would it be? Please have another couple of minutes to turn and talk to the person next to you. I'm just going to I'm going to ask people to contribute if you haven't thought of a horse, just say pass, go to the next one. If you don't know what the English word is for the kind of horse you're describing, we can also go to, because it may be very specialised, we can go to the next person. But if you've got a suggestion, I'd like to hear it. So, this gentleman here, what kind of horse is your school?
Maybe a voltige horse.
Voltige?
Yes, the kind of horse that goes around and you can stand on it and
oh, like in a circus?
Yeah.
In a circus.
No,
like
not really. It's not like circus, but something like that.
Hmm. So it's a horse where you do...
doing what it should, and we try our tricks on it.
Okay. Oh, so it's like a kind of show horse, really? Yeah?
Yes.
Hmm. This could be a long discussion. Okay. This lady here.
The traditional old kind of horse, a little bit rough, but slow, easygoing, not big performance.
A slow, easygoing, and is this a good thing? You don't know. Okay.
It's difficult to express in English, but nordsvensk häst, you know?
No, I really don't. But I think they do. Yeah, okay. Does anybody want to explain that for me?
It's an old kind of horse that you use for example, working in the...
For farming. For farming. Yeah, we would in England we call it a shire horse or a cart horse. A shire horse would be a complimentary description, and a cart horse would be not so complimentary.
So maybe I expressed myself a little bit strange, but now you know what I mean.
No, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it can be a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah. And this gentleman here.
Well, we have a preschool just 2 years old, so it will be very young.
So you're a kind of pony. Your school, not you, but your school. Your school is a little pony. Okay. Well, I'm going to show you some horses in a minute, but I want you to think, and this is what we talk about in the next book. I want you to think about. At the break, somebody was saying, "Are you going to talk about transformation, or are you just going to talk about change?" And so there are two ways we think about change, at least two. One is improvement. And improvement means, are we getting better, more efficient at what we are already doing? So an example of improvement would be, instead of a Mac Pro, you invent a Mac Air. So you have a very light, sleek, efficient version of the same thing, okay? So one is improvement, which is we do what we always do, but we do it better. In education, we tend to do this by working harder, by teaching more often, by studying, by preparing, by identifying where the difficulties are, by intervening quickly, by developing more knowledge about what our practice is. And then the other way we think about change is innovation. And that is doing something very different from what we're doing now. In English we call it next practice, the next thing, rather than best practice. And so instead of improvement taking an aeroplane with a propeller and saying, what's the best propellered aeroplane we can have, we say, let's have a jet plane rather than a propeller plane. It's a complete shift of thinking into a new terrain. And people tend to divide in terms of which kind of thing they like to be. So some people like to do what they've always done, but just be a lot better at it. And some people like to do all the time, but what the next new thing is, the next different thing is. And sometimes in schools, this can divide the people within a school. The challenge is how you put these together. And the way we can think about this is through the metaphor of horses. So, if you are not improving, you're not getting any better, and you're not trying anything new, you're a dead horse. You're a dead donkey, basically. You're not making any progress, and you're not even trying anything different in order to move you ahead. I'm going to show you countries for these in a second. If you're improving, but you're not innovating, you're a racehorse. You're the fastest, sleekest, most efficient, competitive horse that there is. You may be teaching the curriculum you've always taught, now you're teaching better than you ever did. You may be teaching reading the way you've always taught, but now you're teaching it better than you ever did. You're a racehorse. If you're innovating, but you're not improving, you're a flying horse. You're a Pegasus. You're beautiful, you're fantastic, but completely impractical. And it's not really making anything better at all. If every child in your class has an iPad, and you've no idea why, you're a Pegasus. If you have a multi-gym in your basement and you hang the ironing on it, you're a Pegasus. If you have a smart board, but really it's not getting you any further than a blackboard, or it just sits there in the corner, you're a Pegasus. If you're doing lots of things with technology, and most of the research so far on technology in instruction does not show any link to gains in student achievement. It doesn't mean that it can't. It means that on average, at the moment, it doesn't show any gains in student achievement, even though it's a huge thrust and initiative. You're a Pegasus. And if you're innovating and improving, you have horsepower. You have more horsepower than anybody's ever had before, but you're no longer a horse. You're a different way to achieve it. Actually, this is a Ferrari, but if I was really clever, it would be a Mustang, which is an American car. Okay? So, beg your pardon?
What kind of fuel?
Oh, please don't ask me. It's the only picture I could find. I know it's a politically incorrect picture. I realise that. I'm trying to improve it. I'm not innovating, I'm just trying to improve it, okay? But I'm working on it. And here, let me give you a couple of examples of here. And then I'm going to ask you where you think Sweden is right now, which box Sweden is in. I take it to Singapore, and you can do this. So after tonight, you can Google OECD, Singapore, video, and you will find a 20-minute video on Singapore. And it features one school, which we had already studied, not with OECD, but independently, run by a man called Adrian Lim. And it is called Nghi An Secondary School, N-G-E-E, Nghi An Secondary School. And they are extremely innovative in new technology. But in this school, pedagogy comes first, and technology supports the pedagogy. So much so that one of the teachers said that she came across at a conference her previous principal, and she talked to the principal about all the things she was doing in technology, and the principal said, "But you used to hate technology. Why are you involved in technology?" She said, "Because here I can see how it helps the children learn." Our focus is on it's not on the technology. Our focus is on the learning. And I want to give you just a couple of examples of how that works. And I'll give you one other school, then I have another question to ask you. So, I'll begin with a question again. Hands up if you're from a secondary school, either a lower or an upper secondary school. So if you're from secondary schools, okay, there's a few of them. It's not a trap. Don't worry. All right, a few of you. If you have a policy in your school that in some serious way prohibits the use of mobile phones amongst young people, could you raise your hands? Pretty much all of you from secondary schools again. Okay. And if I asked the question in Norway last week. I was in Oslo last week. About 90%, in fact, in a room of 360 upper secondary school principals, all but 5 people raise their hands in response to this question. Almost all of them ban or severely restrict the use of cell phones. They are the tool of the devil, basically. At and secondary school, cell phones are a teaching tool. Children are encouraged to bring their cell phones into class because they use Twitter as a feedback device. So when the teacher is teaching, children are tweeting in their 140 characters what their response is to what they're learning. Whether they're understanding it, not understanding it. What it makes them think of, doesn't make them think of. The teacher can look at these in real time. They can look at these actually as the class is proceeding. They can look at the interaction because the children are the teacher's followers, right? Because there's one Twitter account for the class. After class, the teacher can go back and look at the Twitter account and use it to review what the level of understanding is of his students. And this is especially helpful for students who are shy, for students who don't speak in class, for children whose first language is not English, for children who are of diverse backgrounds, for all kinds of children who do not normally participate well in a traditional class. And it gives the teacher access to their learning. Do children sometimes misuse the cell phones? Absolutely. What does the teacher do? They take their child's best cell phone off them, because this is Singapore, lots of children have a lot of money. So they take the best, so then they're left with a third-rate cell phone. And they really hate that, because no adolescent likes to have a third-rate technological device. It's like wearing really bad shoes, okay? So they take it off them for 3 days, and then they have it back after the 3 days. So the paradox is instead of technology being a distraction, which it often is and can be in so many areas of life, so sometimes we should give children something else other than technology. It's one of the last places, the school, where we can offer this. But we can also engage with the technologies young people use as teaching tools and not as distractions. Second, they invented MSN Messenger as a teaching tool. And so, William Shakespeare, Isaac Newton, and I can never get the pronunciation right, Mendelevium, the inventor of the periodic table, are all icons on MSN Messenger that the teachers have created. They think, using their 10,000 hours of experience, they think of all the frequently asked questions they get about Shakespeare, Newton, and Mendelevian. And then they type answers to those questions as if they were those people. And then the students go on MSN Messenger and they talk to William Shakespeare and they ask him questions and he gives them answers. Can he answer really deep, probing questions? No, because the technology doesn't do everything. But does it get kids engaged for the first time in Shakespeare who wouldn't have been before? And remember, this is Singapore. You might be Malaysian Singaporean, you might be Chinese Singaporean, you might be Indian Singaporean. You're reading about William Shakespeare. It draws you in, and children say things like, this Shakespeare guy sounds really cool. I think I'd like to read some of his work. It draws you in. Paradoxically, by being very innovative, you're more likely to connect with something that's very, very traditional. Now let me move you to a second school, which is also run by a principal called Lim, because half the people in Singapore are called Lim. And in fact, my son-in-law is called Lim, because he's Singaporean, born in Singapore, so I'm probably slightly obsessed. And Cheryl Lim, the principal of an elementary school, introduced in a country which has testing at grade 6 that decides what kind of secondary school you go to, that is very competitive, and the parents pay attention to it. So it's very traditional in some ways, but Singapore also wants to be it wants to be the Finland of the equator. It is actually now the highest performing country in the world on PISA. So one of its policies is teach less, learn more. Teach less, learn more. So that there's more space for innovation within the curriculum, because you're not teaching the delivered curriculum all the time. And part of this is to encourage innovation in the schools. So at Cheryl Lim's school, they introduced an integrated robotics program. So you can see 6-year-olds with electronic Lego putting in the ones and zeros of computer programming to make little crocodiles that they have constructed open and shut their jaws like this. So they're learning mathematics, they're learning computer programming, they're learning language and conversation, they're learning manipulative skills, they're learning all these things across the curriculum. And when they started this, because they're innovating and they're improving, what they worried was, when you start something new, will your results go down? So the principal said to the staff, how much are we prepared to let our results fall as we innovate in robotics? She involved the staff in this discussion. They were trying to innovate and not stop improving. And thank you for coming. And the staff said, we will not fall, because the fact that people tend to fall is an average, not a necessity. We will not fall. And I said, how did you not fall? They said, first, we prayed very hard. Second, for 2 years, we put our best teachers into the year that was tested, just as an insurance policy. Third, we believed that if children were really engaged with their learning, if we were innovating, we would also improve at the same time. The last question for you is, here, the thinking about professional capital is developing quality. This means developing quality in improvement, and it means developing quality in innovation. Which box is Sweden in? Are you a dead horse? Hands up if you think you're a dead horse. Are you a racehorse?
I think we are part of it.
could be a bit, okay? Are you a flying horse? Whoa. And are you a Ferrari or a Mustang or a eco-sensitive Prius or whatever it might be? Because let me just show you the other countries, and then perhaps this is where we could get into discussion. The dead horse is the United States. It's literally very popular when I give this speech in America, where I now live with an English accent. It's not improving, and it's not innovating. It's a low performer on PISA, and their policies are very top-down, very standardized. They're actually narrowing the range of teaching rather than widening it. When Michael Fulham comes, he'll talk about Ontario with you. And the way Ontario presents itself is as a racehorse. So it focuses on literacy, numeracy, and high school graduation. It has clear targets. It tries to drive and move everybody to reach those targets with lots of support and lots of interaction. High pressure, high support on conventional achievement. It's a racehorse, but it's still a horse. Actually, we've been studying a seventh of the school districts in Ontario, and some of what you see in Ontario is actually more like this, which is Finland, or Alberta in Canada, because they're both cold in the winter. It's more like this than like this. But this is not the way Michael tells it. Michael tells, and he's not wrong. Michael has part of the story, but there's another part of the story that is more like this, that is much more innovative, especially their special education strategies. This is the 21st century skills agenda. I could show you iPads, I could show you smart boards, I could show you all kinds of things, when this is all it is this is the Pegasus. And this is the breaking glass of the Ice Hotel down in the bottom. It's almost Swedish, down in the bottom right hand corner. So perhaps this is a good time to think about where are we going with in this country with developing or not developing teachers' professional capital. Where are we going in terms of improvement? Where are we moving in terms of innovation? What kind of horse are we? What kind of horse do we want to be? And how do we get there? And so I'll take questions, comments, discussion, anything at this point. Yeah.
When you were working with Pastor Salberg about Finland, when did you come to the discussion about, when we have discussion the Finnish lessons, the discussion from the point of view that this is where Sweden were 30 years ago?
Oh, you mean the pedagogy in Finland?
Yeah, the teacher education and all parts of it.
Yeah.
Can you see the development of the development of the school system, development of teacher education?
I would say actually that here I was really mentioning Finland to be a bit naughty, but actually this is more true of Alberta than it is. In Alberta, 90% of the schools are funded with government money to design their own innovations. What people say about Finland and what we saw is that the pedagogy is actually, as you say, quite conservative. It doesn't mean it's whole classes, it means often it's small groups, but not with complicated methodologies in those classes. And we haven't seen a lot of technology in those classes either. It's in children's lives, but it's in young people's lives. But it's so, you know, Finland invented Angry Birds, for example, but it's not in their classrooms to the same degree. The teacher education in Finland is, we didn't observe teacher education directly, but what people say is that it is rigorous and it's very connected to the schools. And OECD's just produced a report on Finland, that on Norway, that my colleague Dennis Shirley was involved in, And on the surface, the teacher education looks the same. But actually, in Norway, it's mainly taught by professors who are not connected to the schools. There are many teacher education institutions in Norway. There are only 8 in Finland. So there's a closer connection between where teacher education is going and where the country is going. Whereas in Norway, it's very disconnected, both between teacher education and the government, and also between teacher education and the schools. So on the surface they seem similar, but I think there is a difference between them. What's your opinion?
Well, actually, I think there's a close connection between teacher education and school practice, educational practice.
Yeah.
And we need to take care of that matter more closely than we are doing right now.
Are you more like Finland or more like Norway? Or you like to think you're like neither of them?
We used to be like Finland is now.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting. Interesting. Other questions or comments? Or is this a sign that you want everything to stop? Yes.
I was thinking about when we were talking about the hours of practice to become a good teacher. I think it's a bit weird to talk about like a golden number when we are all teachers. We know that how important it is to practice for learning and for improving, and then not only to practice but how to practice, and then to talk about like a golden number of hours. Then I mean, if I want to be a good football player, I can dedicate 10,000 hours to dribble, but it won't make me a good football player because I haven't done the rest. So perhaps it's not possible, I believe, to talk about like what's how many years do I need to practice to be a good teacher, but how do I need to practice, and how in the whole organization, how do we work to improve the teachers. So I think for me it was a bit provocative to talk about that, because then it's like to make something so complex. To make like a easy form.
It's not. I mean, you're absolutely correct. It's not just the hours. It's how the hours are spent that matters. And the joke you often hear in English, it's not a very good joke, but the joke you often hear in English is some teachers have 25 years experience. Some teachers have 1 year's experience 25 times. I think that sort of sums up. Really sums up the statement that you're making. But the opposite is because it's not just about the hours, doesn't mean that the hours aren't important. The hours are important. So you need the structured experience and you need the hours as well. You need both of them.
Yeah, I was more thinking about that. Perhaps it's not that interesting to see the results of how many hours the good teachers have practiced if you don't see how they take these hours.
Of course. Yeah.
And that's interesting. And how can we use our time to improve better?
Well, this is more research to be done. And this is what keeps people like me in a job. And hopefully people like you too. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? And I'm hanging around afterwards if anybody wants to talk.